Well, we're beginning with Esoteric Astrology Adventure number 144A. We're on page 602, and we have just looked at a very interesting section on the will. We've been given 7 paragraphs in which DK presented a different view of the will, or a different view of the rays than usual. It's not from the consciousness angle. It's not from what we receive, from what we detect. It's from what we do. And the place that to look is here in The Destiny of the Nations on page 145. And we see here that we're interested in the ray from the point of view of force, its energy, its action, and who is produced. One can see here that, of course, this is not in alignment as it should be, and yet it is the Alice Bailey CD-ROM. Nevertheless, we're dealing with force, energy, action, and the occultist, rather than with consciousness, with expansion, with initiation, and the true psychic. And this leads, in the modern world, the keynotes are as follows. For Ray 1, initiation, the will to initiate. Ray 2 develops vision under the will to unify. Ray 3 develops education under the will to evolution. Ray 4 develops intuition under the will to harmonization. It was so interesting about Ray 4, how closely it is allied to Ray 1, and how, when there appears harmonization, the pressure of the spirit, at least that's how I'm interpreting it, leads to death, or to the breaking up of the harmonization and the search for new contents of consciousness, let's call it that, to harmonize. Everything in the whole universe is a content of consciousness from my perspective. There is the development of liberation, and this is through the will to act. Liberation and initiation are very close, with Ray 1 and Ray 5 being related. There is the will to causation, the idealism, and the great idea is caused to be manifest. It is driven through the planes, and it comes from the cosmic astral plane. And therefore we see, in a way, a connection there between the will to fulfillment, as we will be discussing it, and the will to causation. And then there is the development of organization through the will to express, or the will to expression. These are the keynotes for humanity at its present point of evolutionary development. Keynotes for humanity, as these 7 energies play upon the human consciousness in an effort to produce and evoke the will aspect in advanced man they produce, and this is what we've just been discussing. As these, here I'll put it here like this, as these 7 energies, the will to initiate, the will to unify, and so forth, play upon the human consciousness in an effort to produce and evoke the will aspect in advanced man, they produce, and we've just looked at that, initiation, vision, education, intuition, liberation, idealism, and organization. These are excellent, we would say, epitomes, excellent epitomes. And if we can memorize those and hold them in mind, we will have some important key notes for these are evocations. These are evocations within humanity. A close study of these 7 major rays and 7 minor keynotes will reveal these truths and their promise. Oftentimes when we think of the 5th ray, we don't think about liberation at all, do we? When we think about the 4th ray, we do think of intuition. When we think of the 3rd ray, perhaps education is involved in our mind, and the quality of vision is related to the 2nd ray. The quality of the hidden vision. Idealism, of course, is a standard keynote organization. Maybe we think more of destruction when we think of the first initiation. But whenever someone is passing through an initiation, the power of the first ray is present, regardless of what their ray structure may be. Something new is happening, and there's a breakthrough into a new dimension. At the close of the Aquarian Age, these keynotes will vary somewhat, because the recognition of the will, leading to understanding and cooperation, will produce major changes in human polarization and human objectives, realized objectives. So by the time we have the Aquarian Age, there will be many objectives realized, which now can be hoped for, but seem distant. Well, that will be the age of brotherly love. That will be the right. That will be the first. That will be the first time when Venus has really exercised a proper kind of effect upon humanity. I somehow feel like repeating this, that the keynotes of these 7 rays are therefore, as they constitute the revelation of 7 great beings. That's the part I want to repeat. They are the revelation of 7 great beings, and they lead to these keynotes: initiation, unification, evolution, harmonization, action, causation, and expression. And then, when they play upon the human consciousness, they produce and evoke the will aspect, and they produce the following: initiation, vision, education, intuition, liberation, idealism, and organization. Those are really worth memorizing. And as I say, these are evocations within humanity. A close study of these 7 major rays and their minor keynotes will reveal the truths and their promise, and they will be changed perhaps at the end of the Aquarian Age, because that age will produce the recognition of the will, leading to humanity's understanding cooperation with the hierarchy. One supposes that will be the effect of the reappearance of the Christ and the externalization of the hierarchy. And they will produce major changes in human polarization and human objectives. And as I was saying, under Venus, we will have the era of brotherly love. The Christ work will come to fruition. And the 3rd decanate of Aquarius will fulfill its promise. This is, of course, what is hoped for and what is probable, I would say, and deeply possible. Let us now see how these basic ray energies will work out in man's planetary and zodiacal relationships, and why certain constellations and planets are related to certain rays, and transmit into the center, which we call humanity, definite and special influences. Okay, these produce certain tendencies in humanity, evoke certain attitudes of the will, and lead consequently to certain unavoidable events, as well as to definite and determined forms of being. Okay, let's follow what he is saying here. And it seems that certain constellations and planets are related to certain rays. Now, this is in an ongoing sense, but the degree to which a ray is focal through a particular constellation does seem to change, and we're told that even at the end of the Aquarian Age, even that soon, there will be a change of the focus of the ray through one member of the constellational ray triangle. But as far as the relationship between the lord of a ray, even if it's a very high lord, and the lord of a constellation, that will abide, at least for a long time. When he uses the words world cycle and world period, we are still somewhat in the dark as to what is meant. There are so many possibilities, and it's a blinding term, so we will not know the exact cycle. But we do have the sense that the lord of a certain ray and the lords of certain constellations, and also the lords of certain planets, are ongoingly related. Let's just say that suppose in relation to the first ray in the constellations of Aries, Leo, and Capricorn, the majority of the first ray is coming through right now, Aries. It may not always be so. This would mean at the moment that Mars and Mercury, as rulers of Aries, will carry a lot of this first ray energy, or at least somehow transmit it, or it will somehow reach humanity via them, although mixed with their quality. But let us suppose the triangle revolves, and that later you have Capricorn as being at the top of the triangle, the first ray energy is coming in a focal way, the most focal way, through Capricorn. Then it will be Saturn that carries the majority of the first ray energy, or at least transmitted first ray energy, compared to Mercury and Mars. Of course, there are first ray planets which, in a more specific sense, emit the ray, because it is an aspect of it qualifies their nature, whether or not they were transmitting it from a constellation. As we proceed with our consideration of Tabulation 10, there are certain fundamental ideas which must be carefully borne in mind, and let me list them for you, for your helping. All right. We are dealing with the effect of 7 ray energies as they pour forth from one or other of the 7 stars of the Great Bear into our solar system. And we have expanded upon this and shown that while the 7 ray energies are indeed emanating from the 7 major stars of the Great Bear, that their origin is still higher in the scale. They have to originate, I suppose, from the one about whom naught may be said, and they may originate from great constellations rather than from a single star. This has been my proposal during some of the last programs, but it really doesn't make that much difference except for our understanding of cosmic structure. They do come from the stars of the Great Bear, and those are mighty beings, and we can consider them as the sources, even though behind them are still higher sources for these rays. As a matter of fact, if you think about cosmos, the 7 rays, whatever they might be called at the universal level of the universal logos, have to originate there in some kind of original septonate. So anyway, we say that the stars of the Great Bear are the originating origin, but we do know that the Great Bear itself is a great Ray 1 constellation that, let's call it Sirius, whether it's 7-fold or 2-fold, or the Little Bear. They are related to the second ray. They carry the second ray. The father, Great Bear, the son, Little Bear. The sun is always the second aspect. And then the Pleiades, so closely identified for many reasons with the third aspect, though not exclusively. The second aspect is there, and the first aspect is hinted because of its power in our local cosmos system. These energies are the life quality of the 7 great beings who are the prototypes of the planetary logoi of the sacred planets, 7 in number. So then you could ask, well, whoop, that's not what I want. We could ask, yes, that's what I want. We could say, does our planetary logos have a prototype? Or, on which ray would it be, given our present personality polarization on this planet. So let's just say if we consider ourselves a Ray 2 planet, then Jupiter is the related prototype. If we consider ourselves a Ray 3 planet, and for a while that's very likely, then Saturn is the planet that is receiving the energy from its prototype Alioth, the third star in the handle of the Great Bear. And this Saturnian effect, although for Saturn the third ray is a higher ray, will have a personality effect on our planet because the personality ray of our planet is the third ray. So anyway, these beings are prototypes. And there's a direct relation between the stars of the 7 major stars of the Great Bear and the 7 major planets, and ours has to be an offshoot and must be receiving some of the prototypical energy, perhaps via Saturn, or maybe increasingly via Jupiter with its second ray Sol, presumably. Maybe DK will enter into the picture later and straighten out this question of when a planet is listed as having or expressing a certain ray, is that ray the personality ray or is it the soul ray? For the time being, we're considering that the sacred planets are expressing their soul ray and that the non-sacred planets, while working on the expression of the soul ray, are expressing primarily their personality ray. So there are stars which are prototypes of planets, and if we take the analogy farther, I'll bet there are constellations which are prototypes of stars, constellational groupings, which set the standard for certain stellar beings. We have to straighten out this question of magnitude, or let's call it the power of the entity. We have, for instance, 3 different levels of power. We have the planetary lords with their various divisions. We have solar lords, stellar lords, presumably with their various divisions, meaning non-sacred, sacred, and maybe synthesizing, just like the planets. And we have, I would say, constellational lords, who are non-sacred, sacred, and synthesizing, if the analogy holds good, and one would tend to think that it would. Okay, I've changed my microphone here. Strange things happen on the way to the program. So these latter are there reflections in time and space, as the soul is the reflector of the monad where the human being is concerned. Yes, and the personality its shadow, as we have been told. And note that time and space are mentioned in relation to the planetary logoi. So there is not an entire transcendence of time and space at their level. DK often refers to time and space as we know them or understand them. As I say, the entire universe is a well, how did I put it? It was a moment of space, something like that. It's a union of time and space. Without a universe, there are no time and space. And when the universe emerges from the perpetual motion which never began and never ended, time and space, as we know them, appear. Well, maybe we should not say as we know them, because that's occurring on a very high level of the universe, but at least the space, time, it seems, well, let's just say that time and space, or the sense of it, are reborn with the appearance of every universe. The universe is a unit of time and, in a way, a unit of space. The 7 rays express themselves each through 3 of the zodiacal constellations. Now DK is giving us the analysis of Tabulation 10. He has made it visible at different points in the process. Maybe what I should do, that's not it, and that's not it, and that's it. Let's see if I can get down here, and there are various tabulations, and maybe I can bring tabulation 10 up, and there it is. So we'll be able to refer to it if we wish to. Unfortunately, it's not quite as beautifully lined up as I would like it to be, but maybe I shouldn't take time for that particularly. Maybe if I move this, it'll be a little better. Right, so I don't have really 7th ray in my makeup at this particular time, but maybe once did. We all have had all the rays. And would like to... Oh, they are out of alignment, are they not? Well, here we are. Now everything is in alignment, more or less. And we'll be able to refer to it as we may need it. Tabulation 10, and maybe he now says something about it. The 7 rays themselves are each working, express themselves each through 3 of the zodiacal constellations. Here we really should be, I think, using the words constellations. I think we're talking about great constellations who express themselves through other constellations, these other being the zodiacal constellations. Just the way, let us say, that higher planets can express themselves through lower planets, it's possible that greater constellations can express themselves through lesser constellations. And think of it, Sirius, in a way, is a greater star, or a greater solar logos expressing itself through a lesser solar logos. So there's a whole hierarchy within each one of these strata, planets, stars, constellations. And there are other, we could continue it, the strata. The analogy, but not the correspondence, is that these 3 constellations are to the life of one of these ray beings. What the 3 aspects of the monad soul body are to man. Right, well, this, of course, we have to understand how we might do this. It's an analogy, but not an exact correspondence, he tells us, and an analogy is generally looser. So the ray being is the entirety of the being, and the 3 periodical vehicles are represented by the 3 constellations. So, in a way, the ray being is very great compared to the constellations. At least he seems to be telling us that. And we would have to work out the assignment. For instance, when the first ray passes through Aries, Leo, and Capricorn, which one of these represents the monad, soul, and personality? And, maybe in their present order, at least for the first ray, we do see that Aries could represent the monad, Leo the soul, always, I think, regardless, and Capricorn the personality. But sometimes there's a reversal in that first ray triangle, because the highest type of the will seems to be associated with Capricorn and not with Aries as the will that conditions life. So he tells us not to carry this too far, especially if we're dealing with the array being that is working through a single star. Would that single logos be great enough in its being to have constellational lords representing its three periodical vehicles? The proportion is not correct as far as I can see. And we use the word life, Life in this sense, the life is found within the monad. It's the essential monad, but oftentimes when we think of monad, we think about the whole vehicle and its present location upon usually the cosmic physical plane, although there's locations where the monad may also express on the cosmic astral and cosmic mental and so forth. But we usually think about a cosmic physical plane location. So the life itself is the being within the monad, life and being, and the monad then is considered a vehicle. But we have to find a being great enough in scope for whom these constellations could be as monad, soul, and personality. So DK is warning us, and he says, yes, again, it is only an analogy. Forget not that analogy and correspondence are not the same. He uses this as a teaching point. In the first case, there is resemblance, but not in detail. In the second, there is practically identical expression, usually on a lower level, because we do work from above to below in occultism. All right. Excuse me. Number 3, the 7 great beings. See, sometimes when we're looking for blinds, a single star may represent a whole constellation. As sometimes when we look at Betelgeuse, potentially, well, it is or it isn't, but very likely a great second-ray star representing the heart center of Orion, Betelgeuse can stand for the whole constellation. And if it did, we might be able to get a hint about the nature of the entire constellation by looking at the star which stands for it. And that would be a second-ray star, so perhaps indeed a second-ray constellation. And this would tell us something about the stage of evolution of the one about whom naught may be said, our local one about whom naught may be said. Well, this is such an important point, and sometimes you go searching for the books for those points that DK has made, and he's made them in unlikely places. Forget not that analogy and correspondence are not the same. In the first case, there is resemblance, but not in detail. In the second, there is practically identical expression, usually on a lower level. So here we have at least resemblance, because we have three zodiacal constellations and one star. Again, is the tail wagging the dog. There's a resemblance. We can consider this a life, and that the three zodiacal constellational expressions are like the three periodical vehicles. But it wouldn't be a correspondence unless we had a very great being for whom these three could be organized in such a way that they did actually represent the monad soul personality. The life is always at the center of the monad. It's the point in the triangle. It's the elevated point in the tetrahedron. So life and monad are not exactly the same. The essential monad is the life. But the monad as it manifests, which is oftentimes considered to be the monad, is not the life. All right, these 7 great beings express themselves in our solar system as the custodians or the exponents of the will aspect of deity. Now, we have been saying, using Stephen Pugh's term, the cosmic monad, cosmic Manu, the cosmic Manu, that the Lord of the Great Bear is a great first-ray Lord, and so the 7 differentiated major parts of it, those 7 stars, are exponents of the will aspect of deity. Actually, they are exponents, if I can say, exponents of the will aspect of the rays. Maybe on that level I should capitalize the word rays. And maybe I should italicize the word will. Exponents of the will aspect of the rays, because the Lord of the Great Bear is our local cosmic Manu. That is interesting. The Manu, of course, is the recipient of the rays, not the origin of a ray. We'd have to look at the hierarchy as found, well, here's a picture of our local hierarchy ending with the sun, and we would have to extrapolate and use far greater beings. Instead of the sun, we would have the one about whom naught may be said. And the Manu, interestingly enough, would be somewhat far down on this level. But I suppose there are Manus that are working at the solar systemic level and at the level of the cosmic logos and at the level of the one about whom naught may be said. So it would be quite a correspondential study, a great mental exercise, but maybe not too profitable right at this moment. Anyway, to consider the Great Bear a great first ray source is, I think, reasonable, and therefore its major stars as distributors of the first ray. The major stars of the Great Bear become distributors of its first ray through 7 differentiations. Their effect, therefore, is ever to convey into our solar system and eventually into our planetary life the energy of will. All right, in its plan-making, form-building nature. And when DK says that will is not consciousness, it's just such a sentence as this which reveals that to us. Will is not consciousness. He talks about, we have to consider it from the energy aspect and from in terms of the effectiveness of energy, to create pattern and arrangement. That's what we're dealing with here, where the power that moves or stands behind movement. Esoteric books and esoteric teaching have necessarily laid the emphasis upon consciousness as it expresses quality. And he's been trying to help us understand the distinction. That is as it should be, but behind all quality lies that of which the quality is the expression, and behind that is to be found the dynamic outgoing, if I might so express it, which is the motivation of both the quality or consciousness and the life or appearance. Well, here, life, quality, appearance, and he seems to be equating life and appearance. Life and appearance seem here equated. The precipitation of will and quality. I guess that he is calling appearance its own category. But behind all quality lies that of which the quality is the expression. So that's number one. And behind that is to be found the dynamic outgoing, if I might so express it, which is the motivation of both the quality or consciousness and the life. Well, he he really puts these as if they are equivalent. Life and appearance seem equated, but we are also given a good definition. No. Of appearance as the precipitation of will and qualities. So there is a first aspect of divinity, but then there is something that includes all the aspects, the central point in the triangle, and that is being itself. And this dynamic outgoing, is he saying the dynamic outgoing is life, perhaps? Is this dynamic outgoing the essence, life, being? Is that what he's saying? Anyway, we know that behind the first aspect lies that of which the first, second, and third aspects are emanation, the very substance itself. Anyway, he's laying the emphasis upon the will aspect, upon the first aspect. I don't know if he's laying the emphasis here upon life in all its life as essence. The term life is used sometimes to refer to the first aspect of divinity and sometimes to the essence itself. I prefer it in a way related to the essence and not to the first aspect, because there is that which in its being sustains the first aspect, and of which the first aspect is the first appearance or emanation. In any way, the main point here is that we are not to consider everything in terms of the quality or differentiated aspect. Let's see. Okay, wait a second. Yeah. We are looking for something beyond differentiation. We are looking for that which is responsible for differentiation, but is not in the realm of differentiation itself. So we're looking for in a way, we are looking for the white light and not for the colors, and yet it is light, interestingly. Now, blackness would be other than light. And so blackness would be analogous to essence, whereas white light would be analogous to the first emanation of essence, and colored light and differentiated light in that way would relate to quality, that into which the first emanation divides. Well, one has to be careful in these thoughts. After all, it is only human thought at the moment, and it's not a real encounter with the energies involved. Thought is useful as a scaffolding, but it's not the same thing as experiencing the energy. The nature of the will is as yet undefinable, for only the monad responds to its impact. Now, that's an amazing statement. Not the human consciousness. The human consciousness as presently constituted. Only the monad. So we have to be identified as the monad and in that state of awareness. The term awareness is often used in relation to monad. You really can't escape the idea of sentiency and all this cosmos, even though the first ray can block it out in its intention to achieve exactly that which is visioned. The hands clenched, the body braced, the mind alert. the sort of stance of the first ray type as it is attempting to accomplish. The ears are deaf to all the outer voices. The eyes are looking straight ahead and not to either side. This is all in the integration formula of the first ray. And only after the third initiation does man somewhat grasp the nature of the will, and there is that qualifier, somewhat, because the third initiation is still a long way from the sixth when a person is identified exclusively as the monad, and all the other aspects of human nature are seen to be simply that, instrumental to the entity itself, who is the monad. All that is possible to understand in this brief summation is the effect of the will as it makes its presence felt, and the result of its expression emphasized through the three constellations. The result of the effect of the will, so as it makes its presence felt, and the result of the expression emphasized through the three constellations. So we are limited here in what we can apprehend. So the word is the effect of the will, yes, and the result of its expression. That's what we're capable of gathering. Okay. Oh, okay, we'll do it this way. There we are. All right. Undefined. And, sometimes when people think they're experiencing the divine will, the type of will he's talking about is not even experienced by the soul. That is interesting, isn't it? I mean, there is the sacrificial will of the soul. There's also the spiritual will of the atmic plane. But what about the true will which only the monad, as the monad, experiences? So we have to be humble and slowly allow this new aspect of divinity, and it's new for us, and its meaning to come into our awareness. And part of this, and a help in this, is realizing that what we have thought the will to be, what we have thought the will is not what it really is. The constellations in groups of three transmit the 7 influences of the 7 rays to our planet via the sun, who is the transformer, as it is said. So it is via the sun that these energies from the rays and the constellations reach our Earth. All of this is going to be diagrammed very soon. You're probably familiar with the diagrams on page 610, and that's something that people seize upon. It's something concrete, and they can look at the transmission from one of the stars of the 7 rays down to our planet and to man. But of course, there's a lot to fill in terms of that understanding. So the constellations in groups of 3 transmit the 7 influences of the 7 rays to our planet by the sun, and the relationships which I am here indicating are only in connection with our Earth. This is so important. We cannot say that this is how the energies reach the other planets. They do not apply in relation to others, maybe to some, to others of the planets in our solar system, where the configuration of the relationship is different. So a whole new science of energy descent is implied, and we have to learn something about our local situation, but realizing that maybe the rays reach the other planets in a different manner, and maybe through different constellations, or if not through different constellations, through the emphasis of one or the other, in the zodiacal triangle. I don't know. For instance, we are receiving a great deal of first ray from Aries at this time. Maybe there are other planets who receive more of the first ray from Leo than they do from Aries. That's possible. It's also possible that maybe other planets are receiving the first ray from different constellations altogether. For instance, suppose Scorpio, suppose through Scorpio is transmitted constellationally the first ray. We don't receive first ray from Scorpio on our planet, but maybe on another there is for a first ray transmission received. So this is opening up my eyes for the moment. I don't remember this sentence, but it makes perfect sense. You know, there's this law of, I want to call it rational mutation. And it will mean that the various potentials of the constellations may not distribute themselves equally to every planet, but there's a differentiation in the distribution. There's a sense in which, well, as I say, the Earth can distribute any ray. It has within itself any ray, even though the first, second, and third are the major rays, monadic soul and personality, as we'll learn again shortly. And maybe through constellations we do not expect can come rays transmitted to different ones of our planets. Now, obviously, that's going to be in some sort of astrology which does not relate to what human beings should be thinking about as they're trying to apply esoteric astrology to their own evolution and spiritual life. But one day it will have to be considered, the rational patterns of mutation. Let's see, rational patterns of mutation, one day to be considered. This is dependent upon the nature of the etheric web, through which all transmission of energies takes place. So we might say then, perhaps, that if the web consists of squares, one type of transmission, how about typing? Transmission will occur. And if in triangles, then another. And are the synthesizing planets developing a pattern of interlaced circles like the sun, or is it too early for that? Are they not close enough to being of solar status to be able to do that? Well, okay. So anyway, this differentiated type of transmission is dependent on the etheric web through which all transmission of energies take place. So there must be a question of the quality of the web and the configuration of the web. Quality, refinement. There are only 3 kinds of etheric patterns that we have been told about: squares, triangles, and circles. And so maybe according to those squares, triangles, or circles will be the pattern of transmission from the zodiacal triangles and the rays behind them. in every triangle, I suppose, there is the constellation which represents the personality of the triangle, or at least occupies the magnetic position in the triangle. And then there is the evocative position, and then there is the emanating position. Now that can change, but maybe there is a transmission to the different planets according to whether they correspond to the magnetic, evocative, or emanating points of any triangle. Well, this is what the Tibetan would probably call traveling down vague byways, speculatively, which can lead to no real confirmation, unless, of course, suddenly the intuition clicks in and the correspondences all line up. And then you really have something. But, let's stick to the main point. There are 7 rays that are reaching our planet. They are transformed in a way we can use by the sun. And the relationships which he's going to give are only in connection with our Earth at this time. And when we cannot even handle the incoming of these energies and are not really sure that they exist, how to receive them, then it's a sheer speculation to think about other planets, except to know that we have a rational mutating pattern, rationally mutating pattern in our solar system, and that not all planets are in a way treated the same way by the emanating sources. So we have diagram 1 and diagram 2 here on page 604, and let's go there. These diagrams cannot be cut and pasted into the document I'm using. So 602, and here they are, diagram 1 and diagram 2. All right, so in diagram 1, we have one of the stars of the Great Bear, one of the rays. And as I say, the star, I talked about the different possibilities of transmission from Sirius, or the Little Bear, and from the Pleiades. It was one of my speculations, the 3 constellations and the Earth. And then he's filling this in gradually. We have the first ray, initiatory will. It's the will to initiate from the Great Bear. So the Great Bear, via the sun Vulcan, must be very impelling in our system and the Earth. He's going to develop this more. This is a great... it's a square, but it's turned on its end, so it looks more like a diamond, and will be part of what we call the Dorje, a Tibetan symbol, the thunderbolt, connected with the first ray. So will is coming from this highest source, and whether there's more than one star there or a whole constellation such as the Great Bear, in a way, as an entity standing behind these 3, that remains to be seen. One of the ways of blinding is to make the lesser look greater and the greater look lesser. And I think that's happening, all the time. For us, Sirius is a supreme influence, but it is a dwarf star in the more absolute sense, and has nowhere near the power as some of the other stars which seem to us lesser. So let's see what he says here. This diamond-shaped formation, when you see the word diamond, you immediately think of the jewel in the lotus, and you think of the diamond soul, and you think of Vulcan and that which is to be created on our planet, so that the human being can become fully unfolded and indeed the diamond soul. This diamond-shaped formation of the interrelated energies is the prototypal pattern which lies behind the etheric network and is its final conditioning influence as far as our Earth is concerned. Well, as far as the Sun is concerned, it can be something different. Notice in this we have two triangles, and we remember how we are told that an ancient sage taught Master DK how to bisect the square. We do have a bisected square here, and it's rotated onto the point. And this is, I think, one of the means of transforming the pattern of squares into the pattern of triangles. And maybe it's the second aspect of divinity cutting through the middle, which is important in this bisecting of the square, and then the manipulation of the triangles, resultant triangles, to create a star of life. It goes back, I think, to Pythagorean times and to the mysteries which were understood internally concerning the structure of things. Okay, so it is hinted. Oh, I keep on getting ahead of myself. Maybe it's cryptomnesia, but I see what I've said in the next paragraph. It is hinted at in the reference to the diamond soul, of which the Buddha is an exponent. Well, he is the monad, as the true jewel, radiating through consciousness, and that consciousness is not confined in a causal body. This is necessarily a deep mystery, but the correlation is interesting and guaranteeing that, after all, what is he saying here? That we shall achieve this state of unfoldment, as did the Buddha. The diamond. So it's not arbitrary. The idea of the diamond and the symbolism comes from, is related to a central structure within our energy constitution. So this is the pattern. The diamond is the pattern behind our etheric network. We could call it squares, but when you bisect the square, you get the necessary triangles, which are constituting for the most part the etheric vehicle of a sacred planet. And it's very interesting that, as I said, the bisection goes right through the center, right? We bisect through the center and through that which represents the second aspect. So you wonder whether bisecting is not an act of consciousness. And I'll just kind of put that down. Is bisecting the square an act of consciousness, perhaps? In other words, we're trapped within the square until we have a certain amount of detachment. And our detachment is a pulling back, a kind of separation, which is reflected in the separation of the two triangular parts of a square. So we can begin to understand ourselves as a dual being. I want to say this, that the sense of duality and of the pairs of opposites is a form of bisection. Well, that has to be pondered. DK talked to us about the seed thought which he received at one point when his teacher told him that all ashrams were found upon the Antakarana. And, it could seem an easy thing to solve, and yet, did he say that he had gone away for 2 years or something like that before he was able to solve it? And it took him 2 years to understand the implications. So we cannot rush when we are presented with great depth. Things, as he's always trying to tell us, look superficial on the surface, but then why would he bother to present them to us if that was the only meaning? All right, we're having these points, and the seventh point, these 7 rays expressing the divine prototypal will in 7 forms are as possible. But I like this phrase, the divine prototypal will, or basically, since, well, it's the will of the Great Bear, or the will of the 7 major qualitative differentiations of the Great Bear. So that's what it is. So just, looking at the repeating of this, are we already we're over the mark. How time flies when you're having fun. Okay, but maybe, to eliminate the first approximately 30 seconds in which my microphone was off and I did a nice silent movie there. So let's just say that this is the end. Okay. This is the end of Esoteric Astrology Adventure number 144A, and we are on page, there are more coming. We're on page 605. Okay, and we're going to go on to beginning of Esoteric Astrology Adventure number 144B, page 605.